Most people think money problems begin because they do not make enough. Sometimes that is true, but in my experience, money problems usually begin earlier than that. They begin in the fog. The fog is what happens when you do not really know where your money goes, why it disappears, what each dollar is supposed to do once it arrives, what your future needs from your present, and what part of your financial stress is actually about arithmetic versus comparison and shame. When people live in that fog, everything feels bigger than it is. A bill feels like a verdict. A paycheck feels like a temporary rescue. A dinner out feels reckless. A coffee feels guilty. A raise disappears. A tax refund evaporates. A bonus arrives and somehow changes nothing. And then people draw the wrong conclusion. They tell themselves they are bad with money. I have never liked that phrase. It is too final, too moral, too flattering to the system. Because once a person says, "I'm just bad with money," he stops asking better questions. He stops asking whether he actually has a working system. He stops asking whether his money has a... He stops asking whether his life is being run by design or by drift. That is where I want to begin. Not with blame. With design, the most important financial truth I can give you is this. If you do not build a money operating system, someone else will build one for you. Your landlord will build one, your lender will build one, your streaming subscriptions will build one, your delivery apps will build one, your credit cards will build one, your impulses will build one, your childhood will build one, your social circle will build one, and perhaps most dangerously, your own vague idea of what life is supposed to look like will build one. That operating system will always run. The only question is whether it serves you or drains you. That is the mother line of this whole story. Money does not have to feel magical in order to feel powerful. It has to feel visible. Once it becomes visible, you can direct it. Once you can direct it, you can change your life. I have spent enough time around business and capital to know that almost every durable success story begins the same way. Someone gets honest about the inputs, the outputs, the leaks, the fixed costs, the timing. That is true in a railroad. It is true in a retail chain. It is true in an insurance business. It is true in a family. Clarity comes first, not courage, not motivation, not discipline in the way social media talks about discipline, clarity. Because once a person sees the truth on paper, he can finally stop wrestling with ghosts. The first ghost is this one. I don't know where my money goes. That sentence sounds harmless. It is not harmless. It is the seed of almost every money anxiety in adult life. If you do not know where the money goes, then every financial problem feels formless. You cannot tell whether you have an income problem or a spending problem. You cannot tell whether you are drowning because your bills are too high or because your choices are too expensive. You cannot tell which parts of your life are fixed, which parts are flexible, and which parts are quietly robbing you while pretending to be normal. I call this the fog tax. The fog tax is the invisible cost of not looking. It shows up as anxiety, avoidance, missed opportunities, bad choices, and the false feeling that money is impossible to manage because it keeps vanishing into places you never intentionally approved. A person living under the fog tax pays in dollars, but he also pays in dread. That is why the first real money rule is not exotic at all. You have to look, write it down. Every category, not your life story, not your guilt, just the list. Rent, electricity, groceries, gas, insurance, minimum debt payments, phone, subscriptions, childcare, streaming, eating out, clothes, school costs, haircuts, gifts, whatever it is. First the words, then the approximate monthly amount, then the income, then the subtraction. That subtraction is where many people cry, and I understand why. Because for a lot of adults, that is the first time the financial reality of their life stands still long enough to be seen. It is one thing to feel stressed. It is another thing to see the arithmetic. The arithmetic is often much kinder than the imagination, but when it is worse, it is also much more useful. A vague fear cannot be solved. A number can. This is one reason I have so little patience for avoidance. Avoidance protects the feeling in the moment and destroys the future slowly. The envelope stays unopened. The bank app stays closed. The spreadsheet stays blank. The person imagines he is buying emotional peace. He is really renting confusion at a brutal interest rate. Once you write things down, something extraordinary happens. You discover that your problem has a shape. Maybe the shape is I genuinely do not make enough. That is painful, but it is honest. Maybe the shape is my fixed life is too large. Also painful. Also honest. Maybe the shape is I am spending too much in the choice categories and pretending it is inevitable. Painful again, still useful. The point is not to make you feel good immediately. The point is to bring you out of the fog. Only then can you decide what to change. Now, once people see the money clearly, they almost always make their next mistake. They try to fix everything at once. They slash randomly. They get dramatic. No dinners out, no fun, no joy, no Amazon, no lights on, no life. This is the financial version of crash dieting, and it fails for the same reason crash diets fail. It treats behavior like a moral emergency instead of a system design problem. I dislike systems that require daily heroism. They are weak systems. What you want is not a morality play. You want categories. I call this the bucket discipline. Bucket discipline is the practice of forcing every dollar in your life into a limited number of jobs instead of allowing money to exist as one giant emotional soup. When the soup gets separated, the panic drops. You begin seeing what is fixed, what is being saved, what is being invested, and what is available to enjoy without guilt. That separation is one of the simplest and most liberating moves in modern personal finance. There are 4 buckets that matter more than almost anything else: fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt, free spending. That is it. Not 27 categories, not an endless surveillance state around your grocery receipt, not 1,000 tiny labels that make you feel like a badly supervised intern in your own life. 4 buckets. The first bucket is fixed costs. These are the things that show up whether you feel inspired or not. Rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation, basic groceries, the serious machinery of life. This bucket matters because if it grows too large, it crushes every other bucket before the month has even really started. A person with bloated fixed costs can earn more and still feel cornered. This is one of the most important truths about wealth. It is not only about what you make, it is about how much of your life becomes non-negotiable the moment the month begins. When fixed costs rise too high, freedom collapses. That is why I care so much about housing, cars, and debt structure. These are not ordinary categories. They are gravity. Get those wrong, and the rest of the system has to work much harder just to keep you emotionally afloat. The second bucket is savings. This is where people get confused because they treat savings and investing as the same thing. They are not the same thing. Savings is for the near future and for uncertainty. Emergency fund, a planned move, a house down payment, a repair buffer. Money you may need in 1 to 5 years. Savings is not sexy. But savings buys something rich people understand very well and poor people are denied most cruelly. Time savings buys time to make a decision without being blackmailed by the clock. Savings buys time to survive a job loss. Savings buys time to leave a bad relationship. Savings buys time to absorb the car repair, the medical bill, the pet surgery, the family emergency. That is not trivial. Money in savings is not just money. It is dignity in reserve. The third bucket is investments. This is where the future gets fed. Retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, long-term capital. The money you do not need this year and not next year either. The reason this bucket matters so much is not because it makes people feel clever. It matters because time is one of the few truly magical partners ordinary people can still access. A small amount invested consistently for a long time can grow into something that changes the feel of old age, the range of your choices, and the degree to which you are permanently dependent on wage labor. I know people get bored when investing becomes too simple. They want action. They want genius. They want to be entertained. I have made a lot of money in markets, and I can tell you that boring done consistently is still one of the most underappreciated forms of intelligence. The fourth bucket is guilt. Free spending. This is where most money advice either becomes humane or becomes useless. If your system has no place for joy, it will not survive contact with a real human life. That is just the truth. You are not a machine. You are not a monk. You are not a spreadsheet with a pulse. You need dinners out. You need books. You need shoes. You need hobbies. You need a trip. You need some margin for delight. The point is not that every desire should be indulged. The point is that your system must include a designated area where spending is allowed, because the important obligations have already been handled. When guilt-free spending exists inside the structure, you stop turning every small pleasure into a courtroom drama. This matters more than people realize. A person who is never allowed to enjoy his money eventually rebels against his own plan. And once he rebels, he usually does it messily. The reason I love the four-bucket structure is not because it makes life austere. It does the opposite. It creates permission. It says your bills are covered, your savings are fed, your investments are in motion. Now enjoy some of your life. That is a much healthier relationship with money than the constant background message most adults carry, which is that every discretionary dollar is evidence of irresponsibility. No, a dollar spent inside a good system is very different from a dollar spent in confusion. That is why the buckets matter. Now, once a person knows the buckets, the next big lie begins to break. The lie is that the little purchases are what make or break your financial life. The coffee, the pastry, the random $5 charge, the tiny indulgence. I have always thought this fixation on petty spending was one of the cheapest tricks in financial culture. It gives people something concrete to feel guilty about, and guilt creates the illusion of seriousness. Meanwhile, the truly life-altering decisions, salary, housing, debt, investment, automation, fees, career moves, relationship choices around money, sit there unattended while everyone argues about lattes. That is absurd. I call this the decoy purchase. The decoy purchase is a tiny expense inflated into moral significance so that you spend your attention on what feels manageable instead of on the larger decisions that actually determine your trajectory. The coffee is not usually the story. The apartment is the story. The credit card rate is the story. The subscriptions you forgot about are part of the story. The fact that you have not increased your income in 3 years is the story. Now, of course, a life built entirely on carelessness will still hurt you. That is obvious. But what matters is leverage. $10 a day matters over time. $20 matters. But what matters even more is whether the system captures those small amounts automatically before life can absorb them into convenience and drift. That is where the next rule enters: automation. I believe automation is one of the most important financial ideas ordinary people can embrace, because the modern economy is already automated against you. That is the reality. Your phone is not neutral. Your subscriptions are not neutral. Your delivery apps are not neutral. Your one-click shops are not neutral. Everyone in the modern economy wants to attach themselves to your paycheck and stay there forever, not once forever. The most valuable customer is not the customer who buys once. It is the customer who forgets he is still paying. That is the business model of enormous portions of modern life. I call this the automatic drain. The automatic drain is the continuous extraction of money from your life through subscriptions, convenience tools, recurring services, embedded fees, and frictionless spending systems that require no conscious decision from you after the initial. Yes, the genius of the automatic drain is that it turns your inattention into somebody else's annuity. That is why I tell people they now live in an automatic economy. If you do not automate money in your favor, it will already be automated against you. There is no neutral ground. This is where small saving and small investing become powerful. Not because the amount is huge, but because the direction is finally yours. $1 a day, $5, $10, $20, roundups, tiny recurring transfers. Whatever your life can bear, the amount matters less than the behavior. People always want to skip this stage because it feels insultingly small. They hear $10 a day and say, "That won't change my life." I disagree. $10 a day can change your identity long before it changes your net worth. It changes you from a person whose money is only ever extracted to a person whose money is now being quietly captured for your own future as well. That matters, And over enough time, yes, the arithmetic becomes serious. People hear the long-term growth examples and roll their eyes because the future always feels too far away when the present is tight. I understand that instinct. But the real value of compounding is not just the end number. It is the discipline of making a standing appointment with your future self. You send the money, it goes without debate, it accumulates without requiring a fresh performance of motivation every month. That is a better system than relying on feeling inspired. I have never trusted systems that need me to feel inspired. Good systems run when you are tired. That is the point. Now, I want to say something that almost nobody says clearly enough. A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, not only because life is expensive, though it certainly is, but because they have never interrupted the automatic economy long enough to see what is attached to them. If you were to print every app, every monthly service, every streaming account, every premium feature, every gym ad, on every convenience tax, and lay them out on the table, many households would have a revelation. Not that all these things are evil, not even that all of them are wasteful. The revelation would be that their money has been promised in $10 and $20 increments so thoroughly that the month now begins half spent before any intentional living has even started. That is why clarity matters so much. Not because it is elegant, because it gives you back command. Now we come to the final, and in some ways deepest, money rule: enough. This is where most people lose the plot completely. They think money is a scoreboard. That is one of the great tragedies of modern life. Money is measurable, so it becomes tempting to use it as the measure of the whole life. More income means more success. More assets means more worth. More spending means more freedom. More visible, luxury means more proof. And because money is easy to count, people start chasing it as though it can answer self-respect, family, peace, time, health, and love. That is not a fair burden to put on money, and money always cracks under that burden. I call this the scoreboard trap. The scoreboard trap is what happens when a person stops treating money as a tool and starts using it as the master measure of whether life itself is good enough. Once that happens, he can never really win, because money has no natural finish line. Someone will always have more. Someone will always display more. Someone will always be closer to the next dream, the next car, the next house, the next vacation, the next level of apparent security. This is why defining enough matters so much. Not because ambition is wrong, because comparison is endless. Other people will define it for you. Your neighborhood will define it. Your feed will define it. Your college friends will define it. Your family will define it. The luxury market will define it. The housing market will define it. The wedding industry will define it. The parenting culture will define it. And every one of those systems will tell you that enough is just beyond what you currently have. That is how the machine keeps moving. But a rich life does not begin when the world finally stops asking for more. A rich life begins the moment you decide what enough is for you. Enough can be simple: bills paid on time, no missed payments, $1,000 in the emergency fund, then $3,000, then a month of expenses, then 6 months. Enough can mean you can take your children somewhere without guilt. Enough can mean you can buy a coat you love, because the system underneath is sound. Enough can mean you finally stopped opening bills with dread. Enough can mean you and your spouse can talk about money without every conversation turning into accusation or panic. Enough is not small just because it is personal. In fact, it becomes more powerful because it is personal. Money stops being the mirror in which you look for your worth. It becomes a tool again. That is an enormous relief. I know it is fashionable to say spend less than you make, save the difference, be patient, and then stop talking as if that line alone were enough. It is a useful line. Yes, it is also incomplete without psychology, because plenty of people know what to do. What they lack is a system that makes doing it bearable and a story that makes doing it meaningful. That is why I prefer to think of money as a designed life rather than a moral test. A designed life knows where money goes. A designed life gives each bucket its role. A designed life automates future care. A designed life leaves room for guilt, free joy. A designed life defines enough so comparison loses some of its ability to colonize your mind. That is much better than constant financial shame. Now let me bring all 4 rules together as one machine. First, kill the fog. Make the list. See the numbers. Identify whether your core issue is not enough income or too much uncontrolled spending. Second, organize the money into the 4 buckets: fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt, free spending. Do not let your whole life exist as one giant blur of transactions. Third, break the automatic drain and build your own automation in the other direction. Cancel what should go, capture what can stay. Start the transfers, start the roundups, start the retirement contributions. Give your future a standing order. Fourth, define enough. Do not let the market, your peers, or your private insecurities tell you what a good life must cost. That sequence is powerful because it changes more than numbers. It changes posture. The frightened person avoids, the organized person looks, the ashamed person hides, the clear person decides, the person living inside the automatic drain drifts, the person with his own system directs, and over time, those are radically different lives, even if they begin from the same bank balance. This is what I wish more people understood. You do not have to wait until every debt is gone, every account is perfect, and every number is beautiful before you are allowed to feel better. You start feeling better the moment you start. Not the day you become rich, the day you become deliberate. That is when money stops happening to you and starts becoming something you can use. And once that shift happens, the old sentence, "I'm bad with money," begins to sound as false as it always was. Maybe you were unorganized. Maybe you were overwhelmed. Maybe you were afraid. Maybe you were never taught. Maybe you let the system run you for too long. Fine, that can all change. Money is arithmetic, yes. But it is also attention. It is also behavior. It is also boundaries. It is also permission. And in the end, the people who build stability are not always the people who began with the most. They are often the people who finally built a system strong enough that the month no longer gets to decide everything. That is what these rules are for. Peace. Not proving anything to anyone. Designing a life that can actually hold you. That is the best financial advice I can give you. Build a money operating system before the world keeps charging you rent for not having one.